Good morning. Let's study about the flower, its structure and functions. The subheadings in this topic are typical structure of a bisexual flower, complete and incomplete flowers, essential and non-essential parts of a flower, parts of a flower, placentation, the attachment of ovules in the ovary, inflorescence, that is arrangement of flowers on floral axis. Let's see an overview of flowers. Flowers are the reproductive parts of the plants which are responsible for the production of gametes. A flower is a modified shoot in which leaves are modified into floral parts. A flower develops as a branch from a bud in the axil of a small leaf-like structure called the bract, which is generally green in color. Trees that have flowers are called flowering plants or angiosperms. Trees that do not have flowers are called naked-seeded plants or gymnosperms. Example: pine, fir, redwood, etc. Typical structure of a bisexual flower. Flowers have many different shapes, sizes, color, number of floral parts, and the arrangement of these parts. However, all of them have certain features in common. Pedicel or stalk. Flowers grow as specialized branch at the tip of a stalk known as pedicel or peduncle. In some plants such as tulip, there is only one pedicel bearing a single flower. In others such as lilac, the pedicel is branched and bears many flowers. There are some flowers like saffron without a stalk. These flowers are known as sessile flowers. Receptacle or thalamus. The pedicel swells at the tip into a small cup-shaped pad known as receptacle or thalamus. Thalamus can be flat, conical, concave, or dome-shaped in different species. All the floral whorls arise from the receptacle. The parts of flower are attached to the receptacle in rings or whorls. Floral whorls. Whorl refers to the arrangement of sepals, petals, leaves, or branches that radiate from a single point and circle around the stem. Generally, a flower consists of 4 whorls. The calyx, green-colored sepals on the outside, is the first whorl. The corolla, usually colored petals lying inside the calyx, is the second whorl. The androecium, male reproductive parts enclosed by corolla, is the third whorl. The gynoecium, female reproductive parts at the center of the flower, is the fourth whorl. The calyx and corolla, when undifferentiated, together form the perianth. When the perianth is not green in color, it is petaloid. When it is green like the sepals, it is called sepaloid perianth. Nectaries. Nectar is a sweet fragrant liquid secreted by most of the flowers. These flowers have nectar secreting cells called nectaries. Nectaries are found near the base of the pistil or on the base of petals. Nectar helps in cross-pollination by attracting pollinating agents like insects. In nasturtium flowers, the nectaries are very large and prominent. Complete and incomplete flowers. Complete flower. A flower which has all the 4 types of floral whorls, namely calyx, corolla, androecium, and gynoecium, is called a complete flower. Incomplete flower. A flower in which any one or more of the 4 floral parts are missing is called an incomplete flower. Essential and non-essential parts of a flower. essential reproductive parts of a flower. Those parts of flower which are directly concerned with reproduction are known as essential parts of a flower. The stamens, male parts, and the carpels, female parts, are the essential parts of the flower. Non-essential, non-reproductive parts of a flower. Those parts of flower which do not directly take part in reproduction are called non-essential parts of a flower. They simply help in either protecting the reproductive parts or to make the flower attractive for pollination. The sepals and petals are non-essential parts of a flower. Parts of a flower. Calyx. The calyx is the outermost wall of the flower. It consists of 3 to 5 sepals which are generally green in color and look like small leaves that cover an unopened floral bud. However, as in gulmohar, they may be colored and are known as petaloid sepals. When sepals are free from each other, as in mustard or radish, they are known as polysepalous. Or they may be fused to form a cup in flowers of plants such as China rose, known as gamocephalous. Functions. The calyx encloses and protects the inner walls of the flower in the bud stage. Since the sepals contain chlorophyll, they can also synthesize food through photosynthesis. Together with petals, they also attract birds and insects for pollination. Corolla. The corolla is the most conspicuous part in the flower because it is usually white or brightly colored. The corolla forms the second wall from outside inner to the calyx. This wall is made up of petals which are much larger than sepals. The number of petals varies from plant to plant. In some flowers, the petals are green in color, known as sepaloid petals. The petals may be separate from each other, as in mustard flower, known as polypetalous, or become partly or completely fused, as in petunia, known as gamopetalous. If the petals are completely fused, they form a corolla tube. Functions. The brightly colored corolla attracts agents of pollination such as insects and birds. Some petals are scented with nectary, which produces sugary nectar. The insects and birds come to collect this nectar and while doing so transfer pollen grains from one flower to another. The corolla encloses and protects the stamens and the pistil. Did you know that petals are usually brightly colored and showy leaf-like structures in day-blooming flowers, whereas they are strongly scented and whitish in night-blooming flowers? This helps them attract insects and birds for pollination. Androsium. The androsium, andros meaning male, forms the third wall on the inside of the corolla. Androsium consists of stamens. These are the male reproductive organs. Each stamen is made up of slender flexible stalk known as the filament, which supports the anther at its end. Anther is attached to the filament with the help of a structure known as the connective. Each anther is two-lobed. Each lobe has 2 pollen sacs. Thus, each anther is made up of 4 pollen sacs in which pollen grains are formed. Pollen grains are fine powdery granular structures which contain the male gametes. Functions. The anther produces pollen grains which contains the male reproductive cells, that is the male gametes. The filament bears and supports the anther in the most suitable position for the transfer of pollen to take place. Some flowers bear only stamens and are referred to as male flowers or staminate flowers. Variations in the androsium. Number of stamens. The number of stamens may differ greatly in flowers of plants from different families. For example, some grasses have only one stamen. Mexican blood trumpet and jacarandas have 4 stamens, and roses have several dozens. Positions of stamens within a flower. The stamens may originate near the base of the pistil, or they may be fused at their base with the petals and appear to originate out of the petal. For example, in petunia, the filaments are fused with petals and the condition is known as epipetalous. Stamens fused or free. Polyadelphous. The stamens may be free and filaments are united, known as polyadelphous androsium. For example, mustard, bombax, etc. Monadelphous. The filaments may be fused and anthers are free, known as monadelphous androsium. For example, peas, beans, and hibiscus. Diadelphous. The filaments are united into 2 bundles and the anthers remain free, known as diadelphous stamens. For example, peas, gram, and beans. Syngenetious. In some other cases, as in sunflower, the filaments are free but the anthers are united. Such condition is known as syngenetious androsium. Gynosium. The gynosium is the fourth and the innermost wall of a flower. The gynosium consists of ovule-bearing basic units called pistils or carpels. Collectively, the carpels form the gynosium, which is referred to as female part of the flower because the carpels produce the female gametes. A flower may have one or more pistils which consists of ovary. The basal portion is called the ovary, which contains the ovules or embryo seeds. The female gametes develop in the ovules. Stigma. Area where the pollen grains is received is called the stigma. The stigma is the terminal part of a carpel. Style. Often the stigma may be borne on a slender stalk-like structure called the style. Style connects the stigma to the ovary. Flowers that bear only carpels and have no stamens are called pistillate flowers. Functions. The ovary is a hollow cavity which contains the ovules. Each ovule contains an egg cell for reproduction. The style bears the stigma in the most suitable position for receiving pollen grains during pollination. The stigma is structurally adapted to receive or trap pollen grains. Variations in the gynosium. Number of carpels. Peas and beans have only a single carpel which forms a single pistil. Such gynosium is known as monocarpellary. It may be bicarpellary, as in mustard flower where 2 carpels are present. There may be more than 2 carpels, as in magnolia and lady's finger, known as polycarpellary. Position of ovary in a flower. Hypogamy. If the ovary is attached above the attachment of other 3 walls, that is the corolla, calyx, and androsium, the ovary is said to be the superior ovary and the condition is known as hypogamy. Such flowers are called hypogynous flowers. Example: China rose, mustard, and citrus. Epigamy. If ovary is below the level of attachment of the 3 walls and the receptacle completely grows around the ovary, it is called inferior ovary and the condition is known as epigamy. Such flowers are called epigynous flowers. Example: sunflower, cucumber, etc. Perigamy. If the ovary is surrounded by receptacle which grows to form a cup-shaped structure up to the midway of the ovary and the other three whorls sprout from the receptacle rim, the ovary is said to be half inferior or intermediate. Such condition is known as perigny, and the flowers are called perigynous flowers. Example: pea, beans, etc. Placentation: the attachment of ovules in the ovary. The ovary may consist of one or more chambers or locules, which contain one or more undeveloped seeds, the ovules. The area of ovary wall where ovules are attached is called the placenta. The arrangement of placenta within the ovary is called the placentation. Placentation varies in different species. Let's understand some of the basic terms used for flowers. Bisexual and unisexual flowers. A flower bearing both the essential whorls, stamens, and pistils is the bisexual flower. Sometimes a flower has only the stamens or the pistils, in which case it is referred to as unisexual flower. That is, the flower bears only one of the essential organs. Neuter flower. A flower in which both androecium and gynecium are absent is called a neuter flower. For example, ray florets of sunflower. Monoecious and dioecious plants. When both male and female flowers are present on the same plant, it is called monoecious, from Greek, which means one household. For example, maize, castor, etc. When male flowers staminate and female flowers pistillate are produced on different plants, that species is described as being dioecious. From the Greek for two households, for example, mulberry, beetle, etc. Inflorescence, arrangement of flowers on floral axis. An inflorescence is a group or cluster of flowers on a branch of a plant. Inflorescence refers to the way individual flowers are arranged on the axis or floral stem. Depending upon the arrangement of flowers on the axis or the peduncle may be branched or unbranched. The inflorescence is of two types, racemose and cymose. Let's see the summary of a flower. Female reproductive organs. Stigma, receptive part of the female reproductive organ on which pollen grains germinate. Style, part of the carpel bearing the stigma, usually at its tip. Ovary, the basal region of carpel containing one or more ovules. Ovules, the structures in an ovary containing the egg cell within the embryo sac. The ovule develops into the seed after fertilization. Carpel, female reproductive organ of a flower comprising of a stigma, a style, and an ovary with ovules. Gynecium, collective term for the female reproductive organs of a flower, comprises one or more free or fused carpels. It can be monocarpellary, bicarpellary, or polycarpellary. Let's see the male reproductive organs of the flower. Anther contains pollen grains. Filament, the stalk of the stamen. Stamen, the male reproductive organ of a flower consisting of an anther and its filament. The number and position of stamen varies from flower to flower. Androecium, collective term for the male reproductive organs of a flower, comprised of stamens. It can be polydelphous, monadelphous, didelphous, or syngenesious. Let's see some other parts of the flower. Petal, a non-reproductive sterile part of the flower, usually brightly colored. Corolla, Collective term for all the petals of flower. It can be polypetalous or gamopetalous. Sepal. A floral leaf of the calyx of a flower, generally green, usually forms the outer protective layer in a bud. Receptacle. Part of the stem from where all parts of the flower arise. So sepal and receptacle together forms the calyx. Collective term for all the sepals of a flower, it can be gamocephalous or polycephalous. Corolla and calyx together form the perianth. Floral envelope usually divisible into an outer wall calyx, that is sepals, and inner wall petals or corolla.